Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Rice Kill Eat podcast. My name is Tyler Pruitt. I am the host of the show. I just want to thank you guys for joining me today. That is a genuine thank you because without you guys, I quite literally would not be able to do this. I have to have an audience in order to continue putting out this show. And of course, you guys continue to come back. And I just want to thank you guys very much. Now, if this is your first time listening to the Rice Kill Eat podcast, thank you for checking us out. I really do appreciate you spending some time with me as I share some of the great content that I've been able to share with my audience. And thank you for checking us out. And thank you for taking a chance and putting me in your ears for a little bit of time today. Thank you so much. Now, the purpose of the Rice Kill Eat podcast is to talk with people about what hunting truly means to them. And it's the focus of the Rice Kill Eat podcast is to really just bring a new appreciation for the act of hunting and bring a new awareness of what we're actually doing in terms of our pursuits of God, freedom, and the great outdoors. I've had some great conversations with guys like Jeff Danker, Jeremiah Dowding, Jack Carr. I've had some great conversations and great topics about women and hunting, filming hunts. And it's been a great experience overall, just being able to put this content out here and being able to share conversations that I'm having with people from across the country about what hunting means to them and about what they enjoy about the process of hunting. If you guys haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe to the show. I've got some really good episodes, including today's planned out. Go ahead and subscribe to the show. That way you guys don't miss out on any of the future content that's put out there. Also, go ahead and check us out on our social media outlets. So we are on Facebook and Instagram. Very active on both of those, probably more active on Instagram, but go ahead and check us out on both of those. If you want to find us on Instagram, it is at RKEafield. So that's RKE as in Rice Kill Eat, at RKEafield. And then on Facebook, it's facebook.com/RKEafield. If you search our name, RKE as in Rice Kill Eat, a field, then you'll be able to find us on there. Give us a follow, give us a like, subscribe to the show. Now, of course, if you're getting any value from the show, go ahead and give us a rating on iTunes. Go ahead and give us a rating on your podcast platform. And what that does is just pretty much it may help convince somebody who is wanting to listen to the show, who's interested in the show. And if they see that it's getting a lot of positive ratings, it's getting a lot of good things that people are saying about it, then of course it's going to continue to build momentum from there. I'm very grateful. I say it all the time in the intros of my shows. I'm very grateful for the audience that has come around the Rice Kill Eat podcast, and it's been a very fun experience being able to connect with people from all across the country that are listening to the show. And go ahead and join us throughout our journey of the Rice Kill Eat podcast. Now, one quick announcement before we get into the show. We are in the midst of our season opener sale at rkeafield.com. So that's our official website. All of our merchandise can be found there. There's also some links for the podcast that can be found on there as well. But we are in the middle of our season opener sale, which is the biggest sale that we've ever had in the history of RKE Field. So be sure to check that out. We have items that are marked down up to 50% off of their usual price. And this is a sale that is going on as a way for us to celebrate the opening of the hunting seasons. A lot of places are getting into hunting right now. A lot of places have been hunting for a while. Some places like Kentucky where I live, it's going to be opening up here soon. And it's just a way for us to really celebrate and bring in the community of hunters and a way for us to celebrate the opening of the season. So check that out at rkeafield.com. You don't need a promo code for any of that, or all the prices on there have already been marked down. All you have to do is go on there, pick what you want, go ahead and check out. Now, before you check out, though, I want to offer something to my podcast listeners specifically. So this isn't something I'm going to toss around on social media. This is something that is for podcast listeners specifically. If you use promo code podcast, so that's all capitals, podcast, use promo code podcast, it will give you free shipping on your order. So not only are you going to get a shirt or a hat that is way marked down its usual price, but you're also going to get that with free shipping. So literally all you're paying for is that item that you're interested in. So again, that's promo code podcast, and you can find that at rkeafield.com. So I have Dr. Karl Miller on today's show. Dr. Miller is a professor at the University of Georgia, and he is also the director of whitetail research at the University of Georgia in their Warnell School of Forestry. And this was a really great conversation that I had with Dr. Miller. It was something that was very educational for me as a whitetail hunter. It was something that I found a lot of value in. And just being able to have the opportunity to talk with him about his expertise was a lot of fun. And I think you guys are really going to enjoy this episode as well. This is an episode that I definitely recommend any whitetail deer hunter to listen to. Get out your notepad, take notes, because what he does is he basically goes through each of the deer senses. So like its hearing, its smell, its vision, all these senses, and he breaks those down. He gives us the anatomy, the biology of it, and also the physiology, so how everything works. So I'm really excited being able to share this episode with you guys today. And again, go ahead and get out a notepad, and because I promise you, you're going to find some value on becoming a better hunter whenever you know what your prey is capable of. And I learned a lot from this episode. I learned a lot from this conversation with Dr. Miller, and we get into that very deeply on today's episode of the Rice Kill Eat podcast. So one more time, go ahead and get out your notepad, take some notes, and enjoy the show. Thank you so much for joining me today and talking with me on a Sunday evening. I really do appreciate you taking some time and coming on the Rice Kill Eat podcast with me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you so much. You're a professor at, you correct me if I'm wrong, but you're a professor at the Warnell School of Forestry and Natural Resources, and that's at University of Georgia.
That's correct. Been there for I think 33 years now.
33 years. Wow, 33 years. Did you start out as a professor, or how did you start out there at Georgia?
Well, actually, I came here about 37 years ago to work on my PhD under Larry Marchand, who was a very famous deer biologist in his day. And after that, I was hired on here after I got my PhD in '85.
So you've been there quite a while.
Yeah, it's home now.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's Athens, Georgia, right? And that's where your facilities are located.
Yeah, and I never would have thought that I was going to spend the rest of my life in the South, but I acclimated and I enjoy it down here.
Where did you originally come from?
I'm originally from northern Pennsylvania, up in the big woods of Pennsylvania, deer country.
Okay. Yeah, did you grow up hunting and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I grew up in a family of deer hunters. We had the traditional deer camp. We had a lot of, up in northern Pennsylvania, that part of the world, you got a lot of opportunity to be out in the woods and doing outdoor stuff, from trout fishing, deer hunting, and so on. Great place for a kid to grow up, and I spent most of my time out in the woods.
That's great. That's definitely something I can relate to. I mean, that's something that I live in Eastern Kentucky right now, right on the edge of the Appalachian Mountains in Moorhead. We have Moorhead State University right down the road here,
right?
And we're surrounded by the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains with some of the Daniel Boone National Forest. So we have thousands of acres of this public land that we can go out and play on. And of course, we got Cave Run Lake, which is one of the better muskie fishing lakes in the country, really. And it's a pretty neat being able to have my kids, growing up in an area like this where they have access to all these basically outdoor adventures. I mean, it's pretty cool being able to, get kids out and, and similar to your story there, where you're able to spend a lot of time outdoors. And I'm looking forward to allowing my kids to do something very similar.
Yeah, that's part of the world what we're thinking about. Renee and I are thinking about moving somewhere into Virginia, West Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, Tennessee, somewhere when I retire in a relatively short time.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I'd say, 33 years. I'd say that's probably coming up on you, isn't it?
Yeah, I got about one more to go.
There we go. So starting to wind down a little bit for you. But yeah, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really do appreciate it. And I know this time of year is usually pretty busy for a lot of people with hunting seasons coming up and that kind of thing, getting everything prepped. And I'm sure you're getting a lot of questions of, why are deer acting this way? Why are they behaving this way? Why can't I get them to do this? All that kind of thing. And that's really what I wanted to kind of pick your brain with a little bit today.
Sure.
So, you guys have been doing a lot of research at the UGA Deer Lab over like sensory capabilities of whitetails, right?
Yeah, we've been working on different aspects of deer sensory perception. Geez, when I was doing my research for my PhD, that was where we started doing some of the early work that we did was mainly with the sense of smell. The different glands the deer have, how they utilize those glands, what are the composition of the different gland secretions. Are they even functional in whitetail deer? So we did that work on that. And that carried on into the subsequent looks at deer hearing capabilities, and then more recently we looked at deer visual capabilities, and that's been an eye opener, no pun intended.
Yeah, that's a good one. But what was the real motivator behind getting into why a deer or how a deer sees and how it smells and those kind of things? Was hunting a big motivator for that, or was it just simple biology? Was it just simple
Well,
research purposes?
well, yeah, there's two different ways you look at it. One of them was my personal curiosity and everything I wanted to figure out on what makes a deer tick. So I wanted to spend a lot of time understanding how deer perceive the world, so that then I could hunt them better, right? But also there are other ramifications for that. Some of the vision work is tied in real well to deer's visual acuity and visual senses, as far as deer vehicle collisions and so forth. Same thing with the sense of hearing. Uh, you know, Crop depredation. There's all kinds of aspects, applied aspects of this research that would help with the management of the deer, as well as understanding just why deer do what they do.
Yeah, that's definitely it's definitely something that, as I was going through and researching, through some of the things that you guys have done in the recent years, that's something that has been very helpful with just going and just basically a way for us to become better hunters. And I know I've benefited from that just by doing the little bit of research that I've been able to do through
Oh,
what you guys have done.
it's just fascinating stuff, and then the more we find out, the cooler it gets, because deer live in a completely different world than we do when it comes to a lot of their sensory capabilities.
Right. Yeah. And they definitely, they perceive things differently. And I definitely want to break down a lot of the individual senses with you here in just a second. But as a science teacher, the whole biological aspect of everything. And as somebody with science, I teach science full time and then do this little podcast on the
Hmm.
side. And, so the whole aspect of the biology and how a deer works and, how they kind of perceive the world and what keeps them out of danger or puts them into danger sometimes. It's
Exactly.
just all really fascinating for me, and that's of course why I had to come to the top dog in the world of deer researching, and of course had to contact you. So,
Appreciate it.
but so how exactly does a deer smell? I mean, is their nose as good as what it's perceived to be?
Hey, you know what? You know how many times I've been asked that question over the last 35 years?
I'm sure you probably can't. You lost count a long time ago.
Yeah, the answer to that question is kind of yes. So
Yeah,
it's really hard
I've
to pin
experienced it.
down.
That's for sure.
And maybe we need to back up a little bit first of all, and
Okay.
think about what a deer does. Why a deer, when a deer's walking around, what's it thinking about? Everything about a deer is about one of three things: what are they going to find to eat, or how do they use their senses to procure forages and so forth? How are they going to keep from being eaten, because they are a prey species, and the only way they're going to survive and reproduce is by not being eaten, right? So predator avoidance is number two. And then they live in a social environment. They got to communicate with other deer. They got to communicate, all kinds of aspects of social behavior, as well as reproductive behavior, so that they can make more deer. So those are the three things. So every time we think about a deer, whether their senses or their behavior and stuff like that, it's got to be filtered through those three questions. Why is a deer doing what it's doing? And it has to be related to one of those three questions. So then when it comes to the sense of smell, you always hear hunters, and they always try to, everybody knows that the deer's sense of smell is tremendous, and that deer can smell you, from quite a long distance, right? But a lot of people think that that's their most important predator avoidance sense, which it's not, because the sense of smell is actually very good and is very effective at avoiding predation if and only if the predator is upwind. If the predator is crosswind or the predator is downwind, or the human is crosswind or downwind, the sense of smell is totally useless to the deer as far as predator avoidance. So you can get around a deer's sense of smell just by being downwind of the deer or where you expect the deer to be. So having all these different kind of cover sense and scent eliminators and stuff like that, I think they're more of a crutch for a lot of hunters who don't want to spend the time of understanding, trying to pattern the deer and setting themselves up in a situation where they don't have to worry about the sense of smell. So that sense of smell It's important for predation avoidance, but it's probably more important for deer in the other two questions that we talked about. The first one being finding food, which that's how a deer finds food. They don't go walking around through the woods looking for food. They don't carry a field guide to the edible plants of the southeast with them every time they're going out foraging, right?
Right.
So they're using their sense of smell, so their sense of smell tells them whether something's palatable or not palatable. That's how they find an acorn. If you're ever sitting in a tree and you see a deer coming underneath your tree, and when the white oaks are falling, they sound like little vacuum cleaners coming through there sniffing on the ground, and they can smell a good acorn, and they can tell the difference between a good acorn and a bad acorn without picking it up. Because frankly, if they had to look for acorns on the ground, their eyes aren't good enough at that point to actually see that close and identify an acorn up that close. So it's the sense of smell is driving that aspect of it. And then finally, the sense of smell is also driving their communication, how deer communicate. They got 7 different glands that we know of that they use for communication. They use urine for communication. So they live in a social environment, but they live in a social environment that's sometimes they're not like elk where they're in a herd. Sometimes they're communicating that their presence in an area through their sense of smell, not through anything that they do personally or interacting with other deer. So they can leave that kind of odor there in their absence and relay a lot of information there as well. So that was a long answer to your question.
No, that was perfect. No, that was great. Now I liked it. That was perfect. So of course a deer is going to use their sense of smell and leave scents behind. Of course, come October, November when the rut's kicking in, even in December when you get late rut season coming in. But what about the other 9 months of the year? How are they using Are they doing something very similar? I mean, are they still leaving those scents behind so that the other deer can communicate with them? They know when they were there and that kind of thing. So other than the rut season, breeding season, are they still using those scents to communicate with each other?
Yeah, and deer use they do a couple of different things. Some of they leave scent deposits out there in the woods. You've probably heard of like the licking branch that
Yeah.
bucks will communicate all throughout the year, leaving some type of scent on that overhanging branch that sometimes will ultimately become a scrape during the breeding season. But they're communicating their presence in an area even through those licking branches. But so they've got an ability to communicate their presence in their absence, but they also communicate by scent in when they're present with other deer. You're probably familiar with the tarsal gland, which is the most important gland that deer have, and that's the gland where a deer carries its personal identity. We look at each other and recognize each other by our facial features. Deer identify each other by the scent that's coming off their tarsal gland. And we spent a lot of work trying to figure out how the tarsal gland works, and it's pretty fascinating how that actually does work. So we can talk about all the 7 glands that deer got and the deer have, and some of which probably aren't even functional as far as scent-producing glands. But like I said, the most important one is the tarsal gland. And the tarsal gland is that long hair on the inside of the deer's hind legs that they urinate
It comes
over
like a dark color.
and that's what takes on that characteristic.
Yeah.
Yeah, during the rut, those bucks are almost exclusively urinate over their tarsal glands, and they take up that real strong characteristic rutting odor because of that. But what a lot of people don't realize is that all deer do this, and they do this all year round. Even a doe will get up, usually gets up from a nocturnal bed or something like that. She'll urinate over her tarsal glands, and leave some of that urine on that gland, those hairs there, and oftentimes lick off the excess and go on their ways. So they're all carrying a scent with them. It's only that during the rutting season, there's 2 things happen. One is bucks, and particularly mature bucks, almost exclusively rub urinate. Plus, the composition of their urine changes because their physiology is changing. They're taking on, their testosterone levels are much higher. But what's really fascinating is that the scent on that tarsal gland is not being produced by that tarsal gland itself. The scent on that tarsal gland is actually being held there. It's actually being produced by the urine, and it's basically bacterial decomposition that's occurring on that tarsal gland that's causing that characteristic scent. And it gets really interesting when you think about it. The way that gland works is underneath those long hairs on the inside of the deer's hind legs, there's a bunch of for each one of those hairs, there's a gland associated with it called a sebaceous gland. Now, every hair on a deer has a sebaceous gland associated with it, just like we have a sebaceous gland. But underneath the tarsal gland, they're grossly enlarged. They're huge. And they produce a lot of this, what called sebum, or fatty material. And that fatty material goes out and coats that hair. And what that coating does, that sebum does, is it selects out of the urine fat-soluble compounds and holds them on the tarsal gland. But the problem is anything coming out in urine has to be water soluble, right?
Right.
Well, and it turns out there's a lot of things in your body that are fat-soluble compounds, but they get around in your bloodstream by what happens is your liver attaches some other structure to it, like a sulfonylurea or something, that changes this fat-soluble molecule into a water-soluble molecule so it can go around in the bloodstream, go to its target area, things like cholesterol, testosterone, a lot of the steroid hormones and so forth. But it also makes it water soluble, but it makes it so that the kidney can grab a hold of it and excrete it as in its water soluble form. But we still have a problem. Now we got a water soluble compound trying to adhere to a fat. Well, it turns out that warm, moist, rich, nutrient rich environment there on the tarsal gland is a tremendous opportunity place for the growth of a wide variety of different types of bacteria. And we've identified a number of the bacteria that occur there, but there's one in particular that likes to make its living or gets its energy source from breaking these bonds between its fat-soluble compound and its water-soluble compound. So it frees it up, makes it fat-soluble so it can adhere to the tarsal gland, but at the same time, it changes its odor. Because you probably smelled fresh buck urine, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, and if it gets on your knife, you're in trouble.
Yeah, but if you catch it right out of the bladder, it doesn't smell at all like a tarsal gland, does it?
Oh, that's true. Yeah,
It smells
that's
like
true.
it smells like urine.
Yeah,
It doesn't have any of that rutting, that musty odor.
yeah.
It's not until it comes in contact with bacteria that breaks down these bonds that it actually allows these fat soluble compounds then to start producing this musty odor. So it's a real complex way of making the deer stink as bad as a deer stinks during the rut, right?
Right, definitely.
but what it is, and you think about it, as that deer's physiology is changing in the rut, his levels of testosterone and all the byproducts of testosterone metabolism and so forth are increasing dramatically from from very low levels during the summertime and springtime to very high levels during the rut. So obviously his urine changes in composition as well. And a lot of that is reflected in that musty odor that comes out on this tarsal gland. It's the same thing, you think about, athletes that take steroids. How do they test athletes for steroids?
They're going to use
They use a urine test, right?
Right.
Same type of thing here. So, that tarsal gland is real important for communication for bucks in particular, the communication of dominance or aggressiveness. But that tarsal gland also communicates individual identity as well among deer. It's also interesting to think about it when a deer works a scrape, he's working the overhanging branch and then he urinates over his tarsal gland into that scrape, right?
Right. Yeah, that's what I was going to get at there. Yeah.
Leaving his personal signature there, right?
And he's doing that as a form of dominance, just letting the other bucks in the area know, like, hey, I'm here. This is my spot. Don't come over here and, sniffing around, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I think it's more that I'm here. And obviously, a dominant buck is going to want to really broadcast these here. But if we've set a lot of cameras up, and you've probably done the same thing, setting cameras up over scrapes, and you see all kinds of bucks come into a scrape, especially a good hot scrape.
Yeah.
And several of them were urinating there, so they're communicating that they're in the area. Bucks want to know which other bucks are in the area, and they've already, by the time the rut occurs, in many cases during after the breakup of the bachelor groups in the fall, and you start getting this pre-rut activity, a lot of sparring going on. They pretty much set up their dominance hierarchy of who's in the area and who they know that's in the area, right? So they're just letting each other know that, hey, I'm still here. Particularly the dominant bucks.
That's interesting because usually I feel like the misconception, I guess it would be, is that they're establishing their dominance, throughout the rut. But I guess that's the complete opposite of what's actually going on there. They've already know who's in charge before the rut even is occurring because of this ability to communicate.
Yeah, well, they do they do with bucks that they're familiar with, but we also know that there's a shuffle goes on during the rut, and these bucks enlarge their home range. They do a lot more traveling. Then they end up encountering strange bucks, and that's when you generally have the fights break out. Is when two bucks that had previously not known each other and had a chance to establish the pecking order. That's when the dominance fights come. Because also that's at the same time their testosterone levels is at its highest.
That's interesting. That's very interesting.
You asked the question, how good is a deer's nose? And the answer is yes. Everybody knows that a deer's nose, especially for smelling a lot of things that are important to a deer, is orders of magnitude better than ours. And that's basically built on the structure of their nose. They've got that little black thing at the end of their face isn't their nose. That's just the opening to their nasal passages. They got this long rostrum, which they got a lot of those cavities in there, and that creates a lot of air movement as the deer is sniffing. But their nose is actually at the back end, right, kind of behind the eyes, is where the nasal epithelium is. And they have a tremendous amount of nasal epithelium compared to the surface area of our nasal epithelium. So just basically in the number of receptors that they have orders of magnitudes more than we do, which is one of the reasons they have such a good sense of smell. But one of the things a lot of people don't realize is that the sense of smell is based on, you have to have receptor sites for each individual odor or class of odors. So there may be, it's conceivable. I don't know how possible it is, but it's conceivable that there are things that we could smell better than a deer can smell. But a deer smells is built to smell stuff, the types of things that are important to it.
Right.
To be able to smell predator odors, to smell those social odors as well, and to smell food odors. And so each one of those, you can't say that they're 1,000 times, 10,000 times, 100,000 times better than a human, because it depends on which kind of compound you're dealing with. But suffice it to say, it's a heck of a lot more than ours.
Right.
Now, one last thing I want to bring in here, that one of the things a lot of people don't realize is that deer don't have 5 senses that like we have. They have a 6th sense.
Okay.
And it's not that they know when to duck an arrow or something like that, or when to look up a tree. They got a 6th sense in the fact that they actually have 2 noses, and their second nose is located in their mouth. It's called the vomeronasal organ. Just inside the deer's mouth, on the roof of the deer's mouth, right behind where its incisors would be if it had incisors. They don't have front teeth on the top, of course. There's a little diamond-shaped structure there, and that's called the vomeronasal organ. And inside there, right at the back end of that, there's a little pit there. It's called the incisive duct. That's the entrance to that vomeronasal organ to do some assays of some larger compound, larger type of molecules. You've probably seen when a buck comes up to a doe and does this behavior called Fleeman behavior when he smells her urine.
Yeah.
He takes some of that urine up into his mouth, and he opens his mouth a little bit and pinches his nostrils and does his Fleeman behavior. What he's actually doing is it's pumping some of that urine up into that vomeronasal organ for analysis. So that's kind of cool, I'm glad we don't have to do that type of stuff.
Yes, definitely.
But it's cool. But a lot of people think what that buck is doing is trying to tell whether or not that doe's in heat or not, which I don't buy that part for several reasons. But the main one is it hasn't been worked out exactly, but in all the other species that I know of where the vomeronasal organ has been, a lot of other species have that vomeronasal organ. The neural pathway for that vomeronasal organ doesn't go to the part of the brain that the main nose goes to. It doesn't go to the part of the brain that controls behavior. It goes to the part of the brain that controls the deer's physiology or his reproductive physiology. So when a deer smells, and my running hypothesis, and I think we've got a lot of evidence in support of it, is when a deer smells a doe in heat, he smells a doe in heat with his nose. He doesn't need to test her urine with the vomeronasal organ. What that vomeronasal organ is doing is it's exciting a part of his brain that controls his reproductive hormone secretions that ultimately end up increasing his secretions at his gonads, basically building up his testosterone levels, or acting like a way of building his libido, putting him into more into peak rutting condition at the same time those does are in heat. So it doesn't make him tell that this is the doe that's in heat, but it makes him want her to be in heat a lot more, right?
Right. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely does. Yeah, it definitely does. It seems like it's just a way for him to, kind of prepare himself, to get himself prepared for whenever the time does come and he's able to get go ahead and breed that doe. So it's more of a preparation for him to get ready.
Yeah, I've kind of compared it to a deer Viagra.
Right. That's a good way to put it. Okay, that's a good way of putting it.
So yeah, so again, it comes back to the important point is a buck knows a doe in heat from the sense of smell from that doe from
Yeah.
her reproductive tract. We know, and probably just her whole body permeates that smell as well.
So will a buck that is in a highly populated area with does, will they have a higher, drive compared to a buck that may be in a less populated area because of that?
That's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that. I would doubt it. I would think just when it's at that time,
Yeah.
it's that time.
Right.
And if he's with her at the appropriate time, it'll he'll have plenty of drive.
Right. Yeah.
Actually, and you can almost conceive that in a place where there's does are lacking, he's probably a little bit more frustrated, so he might be driven even more.
Yeah, that testosterone. I was thinking, if that is, what it's doing, the testosterone could be, less compared
Right.
to a buck in a much different environment. But the way I mean, you brought up a good point. He may be very frustrated, so his testosterone may be it may be very comparable because of those hormone levels. That's
Hmm.
interesting, though.
Yeah. That I don't know the answer to.
But yeah,
So
that's.
you
Go ahead.
you want to move on to another sense, or you got something else with it, the sense of smell?
No, I think we got the sense of smell hit on pretty good there. I mean, it's basically because I've heard that same kind of the same misconception that you kind of put out there, where they'll say, a deer sense of smell is 100 times more, it's 200 times more, it's 20 times more, whatever. I've heard that used with all kinds of different numbers, and it just really didn't make sense to me because, like, I could be if I'm caught in the right situation with a deer, I could be, 15 yards from it. Whereas, because if its smell was really, 200 times better than mine, then there's no way that it would be able to get that close. So it's the way you put it is definitely makes sense that they have their environment that they live in, and they have a way of biologically determining, what's important for them in their environment.
Yeah, and I think some of those numbers you hear, some of it comes up. Some people have come up with that number based on the surface area of the sensory epithelium compared to a human,
Right.
which is one way of measuring their sensory capability of their nose. But again, it comes back to the individual compounds and the receptor sites that they have. Before we get to the visual one, let's do the sense of hearing first because that's a shorter one because the sense of vision is much more complicated.
All right, let's get into hearing. So how well can a deer actually hear? Because I feel like there's a lot of times that, their hearing is very comparable to a human's. I mean, they're always turned on, and they can flip their ears around and almost like a sonar or like a radar satellite. But I feel like in a lot of ways, from my own observations, and I feel like in a lot of ways it's pretty comparable. So, what's the actual biology behind it?
Okay, well, to date, there has been two studies that have looked at that. One of the studies we did at Georgia, where we actually used what's called an auditory brainstem response, where we played tones into a sedated deer and recorded the brainwave patterns in response to them, so we could actually get a measure of the brain activity in response to different sounds, which is what they do for a lot of, they would do for infants or other types of animals as well. So it gives us an idea of, the deer's, of at least what their capability is. And the other study was a neat study that was done by a father-son team up at the University of Toledo, where they trained two deer to respond basically like, Pavlov's dog. They hear a sound and they get a food reward,
Right.
or so it was a conditioning thing. And basically, the two studies showed pretty much the same thing, a little bit of difference, but not that much. And what they did show is that a deer's hearing capability is quite similar to a human's hearing capability, except that they're right shifted a little bit, about 1 to 2 octaves to the right. So they're, where we hear best, they hear best just a little bit higher than we do. But that's a very minor detail because in the normal range of where most sounds are that are important to a human or a deer, both of us have about the same hearing capability, which fascinates and surprises a lot of people because they've been sitting on a deer stand and they've been watching this deer, and all of a sudden the deer picks his head up and turns and looks off in a different direction at something it heard that the hunter never heard. Well, how did that happen? How did the hunter never hear it? Well, the hunter probably heard it, just didn't recognize it as something unusual. And kind of the way I explain this is, a deer lives in the woods 24/7, 365, right? It knows
Right.
what it's supposed to hear, and it knows what it's not supposed to hear. Just like if you're driving down the road in your pickup truck and you know what their truck sounds like, and all of a sudden you hear something unusual, you know that that's an unusual sound, right?
Right. Yeah. Something's
And
wrong. Yeah.
you pick up on the unusual sound. Or if you dropped a dime on a hardwood floor, you can pretty much almost identify that as a dime, right?
Right.
So we understand things that we're supposed to hear, and we can identify those things real clear. A deer does the same thing, and it knows the difference between a squirrel hopping through the woods and a hunter stepping on a branch. It can hear those, it can hear that that is something unusual. I need to pay attention to it. Now, there's one other aspect of deer's hearing that's important as well, is deer do have those large external ears, which actually helps them in two ways. One of them is like kind of cupping your hand to your ears. It accentuates the amount of sound waves going into the ear. So when a deer has its ears cupped towards something, it accentuates their hearing ability, and they can probably hear better than we can, when they're doing that. But on the flip side, when their ears are cupped forward in one direction, it takes away from their hearing capability in the other direction, which is why a deer's ears are constantly in motion, trying to scan in different directions and pick up sounds in different directions.
So it's similar to kind of like the audio equipment, like you would see, behind the scenes of, I don't know, maybe a TV show or something, where they have that big plastic parabola, where
That's right.
it's pointed towards one direction, pick up the noise in that one direction, but everything behind it's going to be pretty poorly affected. So it kind of has that same,
Right.
like you said, the cupping mechanism.
Right. So it kind of takes away the background noise and focuses on what the noise of interest is. There's one other aspect of this is kind of interesting as well. I told you that they're kind of right shifted. They hear a little bit higher octaves than,
Right.
about an octave or two higher is their best hearing. And part of that may be due to an animal's ability to localize the source of a sound is related to the size of its head. And when you have a small head like a deer's ears are actually, quite close together.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to localize a sound, it needs a higher pitch, a higher frequency. And as body size, as head size decreases, the ability to locate sound requires higher and higher pitch.
So what kind of effect has this had on deer as far as, avoiding or getting themselves caught up in auto collisions? I know that's something that you guys have looked into quite a bit. I mean, is it more of a sense of hearing that either gets them into trouble or out of trouble when in terms of being beside a road?
There's been a lot of people, and you've probably seen these things like deer whistles that people put on their vehicles. It's supposed
Yeah.
to produce this ultrasonic sound that scares deer off a road. Well, a couple of things related to that. First of all, deer don't hear in the pitches that the frequencies that those things are supposed to make anyways. They don't hear
Interesting.
very well at all. And number two is, if you think about it, there's a thing called attenuation, and sounds that are really, really, really high pitched get attenuated very fast. In other words, they don't carry far. That's why foghorns and stuff like that are all low pitched stuff, because they carry, that sound carries long distance, but high pitch doesn't carry very far. So for a deer whistle to produce a frequency in the frequency that they say they produce, that would project far enough in front of that vehicle going 55 miles an hour down the road, for to be able to be picked up by deer, and then give that deer time to react on top of it, that frequency would have to be so loud it would probably shatter every window in that vehicle.
Interesting.
It probably would, it would just have to be incredibly loud, high pitched, sound like that. And there's no reason to think that, why would that scare a deer off the road any different than a lower pitch sound? So basically, the sound is not going to do anything. And some of our research has shown that, sound, we've tried a lot of different sound production types things to keep deer or avoid deer vehicle collisions, and we found no response to deer to different pitches and so forth. So I don't think sound is going to be anything that's going to be useful as far as deer vehicle collisions.
Right. So is there actually a solution to avoiding, if you say, for example, you have a deer on the side of the road, is there actually a solution that you can do? I mean, I've heard all kinds of different crazy things, from yelling out the window to honking your horn or anything. So these types of sounds, especially I feel like in deer within suburban environments, they're probably going to be, that's part of their environment. They're probably going to be accustomed to that kind of thing. They're going to be accustomed to noises, and to produce a reaction to where they run away from the car probably wouldn't give them the reaction that they're actually wanting to occur.
Yeah, and if you think about when most vehicle collisions occur with deer, the vast majority occur in that 1 month period around the rut.
Yeah.
And that's when deer are running across the road, and they're not thinking with their head.
Right.
And they're not. There's a lot of deer crossing the road just because there is a tremendous amount of deer movement. Bucks are chasing does. They're in unfamiliar areas as well. All these types of things are going on hunting. It's hunting season as well. So that amount of deer movement is causing an increased probability that deer is going to cross the road. Many times, particularly like during the summertime, you're driving down the road, you'll see a deer standing on the side of the road. A lot of times those deer are just feeding on the side of the road. If you just let them go and do nothing, you're probably going to be better off than anything, because if you try to scare them, 50-50 chance they're going to go in front of you instead of away from you.
Exactly.
So in those situations, just let them be. And just, that month of November in the East, you just be very, very diligent about watching what's going on both sides of the roads as you're driving.
Yeah, I've observed that before, where you'll be driving down the road and you'll see a buck come running across the road, and he's not even aware of anything going on. He's just trying to get across the road to pick up on, I guess, going back on the smell, like we were talking about a minute ago.
Mm-hmm.
Going back on the smell, he's picked up probably a scent from a doe or something, and he's trying to get across the road to figure out what's going on, as far as figuring out where, if there's a doe over there or whatever. And you can just see in his behavior that he's not aware of his environment. He's not aware of these cars that are, but could potentially hit him out. There's just 2 years ago, I saw a small little 6-point buck who just, basically sprinting across the road. I mean, he didn't pay any attention to anything around him, and he just went on down into the woods and, carried on. And this was middle of November whenever that occurred.
Yeah, and think about this too. That's also the time where you got a lot of yearling bucks dispersing, so they're all in unfamiliar territory as well. They might have never encountered that road before.
Right.
So, there's all kinds of things going on. But that drive to reproduce in a buck is, that's what guarantees the perpetuation of the species, and that's much more important than his personal safety at that point. He's got a very short time to pass on his genes. So, safety, he's kind of throw caution to the wind.
Right.
It's kind of interesting. We've got a big study that we're just finishing up down on the Florida Panther Range down in South Florida, where we've had a bunch of GPS collars out on bucks and does down there. And the mortality rate of bucks that are killed by panthers goes way up during the rut, because these bucks are moving so much more. They just do a lot more risky behavior because it's the reward's worth the risk.
They've let their guard down, and they're not as aware of the things around them. Yeah.
Right. Put it in a hunting context, it's not necessarily the noise you make, it's the kind of noise you make.
Yeah.
And if it's any noise that's unusual, you can walk through the woods and mimic the cadence of a squirrel and do a lot better than just the clomp of a human walking through the woods. If a human can tell the difference between a squirrel and a human, certainly a deer can.
Clinging the bow up against the metal ladder probably isn't a good idea whenever you're trying to get up into your stand.
Yeah, we've all done that.
Yeah, of course. Right? Trying to bring
missed shot opportunities.
Right. Yeah. So trying to mimic the sounds of the environment, to especially entering and leaving the woods, to basically, just try not to draw too much attention to yourself, too much out of the ordinary attention to yourself. So is blue light, as far as vision goes, so is blue light. So I've always heard that, first thing in the morning, last thing in the evening, those are the best times for deer movement. I mean, I think there's a lot of different things, temperature and, thermals and all that kind of thing that can play a part in that. But as far as their vision goes, is that blue light period, those, I guess it'd be 30 minutes-ish to an hour or so, depending on the weather and that kind of thing. Is that going to be its prime movement because of its vision? Or what's the biology of a deer's eye going to be looking like as far as how it can see?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, but and I'm going to take you back quite a ways to understand how a deer's eyes work.
Okay.
and we've only got an hour or less than an hour, so we can't cover it all. But there are
Right.
so many
Yeah.
differences in a way a deer's eyes work and the anatomy and physiology of a deer's eyes versus our eyes, that when they're looking at something and we're looking at something, they're seeing something that's almost completely different. So let's first of all talk about some things that general knowledge about a deer's eye is, one of which is they've got a much larger eye, much larger opening or pupil opening to the eye, pupil diameter, which obviously lets a lot more light in, just like the objective lens on a scope would. You increase the objective lens, you're going to increase the light gathering ability by the square of the diameter increase. So a deer's eye has a lot more ability to let light in. They also have that reflective layer called a tapetum lucidum behind the rods and cones. So when light comes in a deer's eye, it goes through the pupil opening, and then it goes to the back of goes to the retina, where it crosses over the rods and cones, and that's where the light is picked up. But in a deer and a lot of other nocturnal animals, everything from a whippoorwill to an alligator to a dog, they have this what's called a tapetum lucidum, which then reflects that light back out over the rods and cones a second time. That's why all these animals, there you see the eye shine from them.
Okay. Yeah,
And
that's interesting.
we don't see.
Yeah.
So that basically what that does is double the amount of light that they get that goes over the rods and cones compared to what a human could have. So if their pupil opening is 3 times the size of ours, which would mean 9 times the light gathering ability, and then you got a tapetum lucidum, we're up to 18 times the ability to see in dim light conditions that we got, which is one of the reasons deer can run through the woods at night and we can't do that, right?
Right. Yeah. We could for a short period of time until we smacked into a tree.
Right, but it also that tapetum lucidum also takes away, and we'll talk about that later. It takes away a little bit of the visual acuity. Okay, so but there's been a lot of discussion. Early on, people used to think the deer only saw in black and white, which we know is not true. We did a study way back in about 2000, 2001, where we went into the deer's eye, and we were able to look at the rods and cones and actually identify the photopigments on the deer's cones. And cones are what we see. Rods are what we see in black and white. Cones are what we see in color. But our ability to see in color is built on the photoreceptors that are on the particular cones. We have 3 photoreceptors in our eyes. One peaks in red, one peaks in blue, and one peaks in green. RGB cables, right? And all the other colors that we see are an integration of those 3 colors. So we see what is called trichromatically. When we did that study years ago, we found out is deer don't see trichromatically, they see what's called dichromatically. They have a blue cone that's very similar to our blue cone, and then they have a medium wavelength cone that's about halfway between our reds and our greens, which would suggest what we've concluded from that. What we did there is deer see blues fairly well, and there's some reasons why they could probably see blues better than we can. We'll get into that later, but they don't see as far into the red spectrum as we do, which means a dark red would look black to them, and which also means they don't see blaze orange as vividly as we do as well.
Exactly.
So there's no excuse for not wearing blaze orange.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but that was based on physiology. We went inside the deer's eyes, so we needed to figure out, have the deer tell us exactly what they're seeing, because there's other things that could be going on that just because their eyes said that they had the capability to see these doesn't necessarily mean that's how good they can see them. For example, the ability to see blues. In our eyes, in our lenses, we have a yellow filter, and that yellow filter filters out some of the blue lights, and particularly the ultraviolet light, because we're a long-lived species, and if we let all that ultraviolet in, it'd burn out our retina. Well, from our work, our physiology work, our anatomy work, it turns out the deer don't seem to have that yellow filter, so they're actually emitting more blue light into their eyes. Then we went back in and looked at the distribution of the rods and cones. And it turns out that the distribution of the rods and cones on a deer's retina is very, very different than ours. Our rods, our cones for our color vision are all really highly focalized in one particular spot in our retina called a fovea centralis. Because when a human being is looking at something, we're looking at a point in space. Our eyes are constantly moving. And we're looking at something near, something far. We're reading, our eyes are scanning a page. When you're looking at your computer, you're looking all over the screen. So our eyes are constantly moving, trying to focus an individual point in space. Well, it turns out the distribution of the cones in the deer's eye doesn't look like that. The blue cones are kind of scattered all over the deer's eye, the retina, and the longer wavelength cones are actually in a band that go all the way across the retina. The blue cones are in higher concentration than they are in humans, even in the fovea centralis, and that band for the longer wavelength cones are in high densities all the way across that retina, but not quite as high as in our fovea centralis. What this means is when there's when there's something moving out there that's in the blues, or particularly in any of the colors, think about what happens if. Have you ever watched a horse out in the pasture? Because a horse's eyes is very similar to a deer's eye. They got this slit pupil opening, and if a horse is standing out in the pasture and a car drives by, what's the horse do? It just picks up his head and stares. It doesn't track that car with its eyes. It actually holds its eyes constant, which means the image of that vehicle moving moves across the retina and moves across that retinal streak. So they don't have to track movement by following it with their eyes. The movement actually moves across the back of their eye in the retina.
Interesting. Almost like a panoramic perception.
So now think about how this works. For a deer to run through the woods, what they're seeing is this panorama going by them as they're running through the woods. Instead of we're running through the woods, we have to look at every stick, every branch, every rock, and everything else like that, trying to identify that and keep track of all that stuff. It's all moving in a panorama for a deer. That what we call that visual streak, that streak of cones across the retina, are all in the horizontal, because where's danger going to come for a deer?
It's going to come from the side,
not
probably,
from above,
right?
Or not from below. It's going to come from the horizon, right?
Right.
So what that means, what this translates to, is deer have a tremendous ability to pick up movement, but it also means that their visual acuity of a stationary object is not that good. Matter of fact, we've done some work on deer's visual acuity of their ability to look at a stationary object, and believe it or not, they'd almost have to wear corrective lenses to drive.
Interesting.
They can't identify an object unless it's moving very well. But once they start to move, that's when they start to pick up, they'll get the 3 dimensions on it, and it enhances their visual acuity. Let me give you an example of this. You've seen this 1,000 times. You walk out into a field, into a food plot, and you look way 200 yards at the other end of the food plot. You look down there and they say, hey, there's a deer down there.
Mm-hmm.
And what's that deer do? It looks at you and says, what's that? And then it stares at you. Then it starts moving side to side.
Yeah.
What it's trying to do is get a 3-dimensional on you, because if you remain stationary, how many times have you had a deer walk right up on you and not seen you?
I mean, several times.
Yeah, if you're stationary,
right.
They're not going to pick out, identify that object. But as soon as you move, they pick that up in a heartbeat. Which that is the deer's biggest defensive mechanism, is identifying movement. So much more than a sense of smell, I worry more in a stand about being picked up by moving, because a deer, particularly if you're hunting on the ground, deer have a tremendous ability to pick up that movement.
That's interesting, because I've always heard, the sense of smell, which of course is going to be important, but it seems like, sitting still and, being patient, not moving, not making unnecessary movements is going to be what's really going to be allow us to be more successful in the stand. So from a hunting standpoint, whenever you are spotted, for like the example you gave, whenever you see the deer off in the distance, you are spotted. The best defense is just to stand there and kind of let it go back to doing what it's doing.
Yeah. Do not try to move. Just, let them figure out that you're a fence post, right?
Right.
Because until you move, you are a fence post to them. So now we get to your question about blues, and it does turn out that deer have a much enhanced, probably 20 times, and that's just a ballpark guess, of ability to see in the blue part of the spectrum compared to us. Because of one of the aspects is that yellow filtering, they also have more blue cones. They have a different distribution of blue cones. So blue can be very useful for them, which is what you would expect. An animal that moves crepuscularly, morning and evening, or at night, the main part of the color spectrum that's out there at that time was going to be, highly dominated by the blue spectrum. So it allows them to see a little bit better using those wavelengths of light. which is very interesting because when you look at a lot of modern day camo, a lot of modern day camo have a lot of brighteners in them that does reflect a lot of white, and in all the white there's blue. So
That's
at
true.
that time
Yeah.
of night, when you got blue light out there, that camo is reflecting blue. You're just a beacon out there.
Right. So you're not hitting at all. You're actually shining bright for them.
Exactly, and I think that that any camo that comes up with the ability to hide the blue part of that spectrum is going to be much more effective, particularly for a morning and evening camouflage.
Right. So going back to that yellow filter, so during the day, since deer don't have that yellow filter that we have, that kind of blocks our retina for us, do their vision, does it begin to decrease throughout the day, like as the sun is coming up and we're getting out of that blue light, midday? Does their vision actually begin to decrease as far as their acuity goes because of that
No,
absence
I,
of the yellow
I, I don't. I
filter?
don't think so. Because all those wavelengths of light are still there, and actually they're much more enhanced.
Okay.
So their visual acuity is still going to continue to go up. Now,
Okay.
let me tell you one more thing that's really cool that we haven't even published on this. We're just working on getting the manuscript done. But there's this concept of vision called the flicker fusion rate. And you've seen this kind of experiment before, where you see this ball is flashing on your computer, and it flashes faster and faster and faster and faster until it gets to a point where it looks like a solid ball,
Yeah.
but it's still flashing. Okay, when it gets to that certain frequency, that's called the flicker fusion rate. That gets to your eye's ability to process visual images. You just can't process it any faster than that. Well, we actually went into the deer's eyes and determined what their flicker fusion rate was compared to ours. And it turns out their flicker fusion rate is at least twice as fast as ours. In other words, they're processing visual images, twice as fast as we can process visual images. Now think about that when it comes to detecting movement as well.
Right. Even a
They
movement
can,
of a finger or a hand, you're in trouble.
yeah, I mean, they can process stuff so fast that both in the daytime and at night, which was what you would expect for an animal that's going to be running through the woods, right? You got to be able to process that stuff,
Especially at the speeds that they're running through at.
right? And also to detect a predator moving through the woods as well. So their processing speed is really incredible.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's a great way of putting everything out there and really laying out how a deer's biology works for it. And I've got so many questions I'd love to ask you, but unfortunately we're running out of time. And as much as I want to keep on going and want to pick your brain more, then I think we're gonna have to stop at taste. So I wanted to get the final, I guess the final sense here. And what I guess in a way it's the final sense in as far as human biology goes. But as far as taste goes, I'm sure this is very similar to its smell. But does a deer have a preference in how a certain food source tastes? I mean, because you see all these apple flavored products that are floating around in the hunting industry. You see all these different flavored things that are out there. Does that really have an effect on what a deer prefers?
Obviously deer have a sense of taste, and there are certain things that they would prefer over other things. I mean, that's the way God made them. Way it would just make sense that way. And the other thing is realize that also that the sense of taste is really built on the sense of smell. So in humans, our taste buds can do sweet, sour, salty, and bitter, right? And the rest of our sense of taste comes from our sense of smell. You take away a person's sense of smell, and we pretty much lose our ability to taste a lot of foods. And I'm sure it's the same way with deer. And deer are very, very capable of identifying all different types of smells and identifying what's good to eat and what's not good to eat. And if there's certain things that smell that it might be more nutritious, it might be more, it's hard to get inside a deer's head to know what
Right.
exactly they're thinking. But, any type of flavor enhancer conceivably could work. Now, is it going to make deer come from a further distance, or is it going to attract them quicker? Maybe not, but it may make them eat more of it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've seen the flavor from the apple flavored corn. I've seen the persimmon flavored mineral and all these types of things that are, I guess they're triggered or they're they're targeted towards these deer, and in order to have them eat more, or in order to bring them from those further distances. But it definitely seems like, based on what you're getting at here, is that they do have a preference for those types of products, I guess.
It kind of surprised me when you see something like apple flavored corn. Deer like corn just well enough as itself.
Right. And I've actually seen
And
that
there's a lot of
before.
places where there aren't apples. So I don't know that you need to enhance corn, but
Yeah, that's interesting. So thank you very much for spilling out everything you had there for as far as the sensory capabilities go of a deer. And like I said, I've got so many things I had on our list here, and we've been talking a little bit the past, I guess, a week and a half or so about what we're actually going to talk about on this episode of the podcast. And we narrowed it down to the sensory capabilities. And I've got, like I said, so many other things that I'd love in the future to talk with you about. Things like their migration patterns and antler physiology, aging deer, all these things that are interesting, not only to me, as somebody who I feel like I'm somewhat science minded, and but also as a hunter. So how the deer actually works, and I can't thank you enough for being on the show and sharing your knowledge and your research with me.
Tyler, if you want to do it again at any time, just let me know. We can go on and talk about any other subject. You know, when I saw what your podcast title was, and it comes from Acts 10, I said, yeah, I'll do it.
Absolutely. That's
So,
where it came from. Acts chapter 10 and rise, kill, eat. And that's really what we embody this whole show about. Actually just had a conversation with Jeff Danker, and we got into the whole faith and hunting side of things. And, I had to, of course, I try to be as diverse as I can, but have hunting as the middle, as the centrality of the whole podcast show. So again, I can't thank you enough. And I always have one question that I like to ask my guests at the end of the show. And with your background and with your knowledge and everything, I'm interested to see what you come up with here. And that's my question for you is, what does hunting mean to you?
well, that is a loaded question, and we could do another hour on that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you know, and I knew you were going to ask a question like this, and I thought a little bit about it here this afternoon. And I grew up in a family of hunters. I grew up where hunting was the challenge, and that's why one of the reasons why we all hunt. It's a challenge. It's a sport. It's pitting yourself against a wild animal on his terms, his or her terms. And I think most people progress through that phase, and the kill is important. But I've reached an age where I've got beyond that. I think obviously hunting. If you don't kill, you don't hunt.
Right.
Obviously, so killing is still part of it. But I think the biggest thing, and for me, as far as hunting is concerned, is it's a chance for me to leave the world of humanity and get back into God's creation, and just spending the time out there without my cell phone, without somebody wanting to do a podcast, without
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
all this other type of stuff, where I can actually get one-on-one with God and spend some time out there and enjoy what He created out there, and just see stuff that you can never see in any part of man's creation. And it's just phenomenal for me to get that peace and that tranquility, and at the same time still have the challenge of trying to pit yourself against another animal.
Right, there's a certain bit of competition that comes with it, because you're out in the woods and you're in this animal's environment, and you're trying to, I guess, outwit it is a way to put it. And there's definitely an appreciation for that animal, and then of course there's always that appreciation of God as the designer of that animal, as God as the designer of creation, the creator. And yeah, I've always said that some of my favorite moments of getting close with God have come, when I'm out in the woods pursuing some type of animal, whether it be a deer or turkey or whatever it may be. Some of my best moments with God have happened out in those places.
Hey, that's where God found me, on a deer stand, is when I finally committed. I was actually sitting on a deer stand.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's a great story and great information you just shared. And I really do appreciate it. What kind of resources do you have for hunters and for land managers and people who basically just want to educate themselves further on how a whitetail is wired and its biology, all these types of things. What kind of resources would you suggest?
I'll tell you what, the best clearinghouse for information about deer, and there's a lot of other universities doing research on deer as well. And almost all of us will, at some point, as our research projects come to fulfillment, we'll end up publishing an articles or something in. You're familiar with the Quality Deer Management Association,
Yeah,
I'm sure,
absolutely.
and their journal, Quality Whitetails. That organization, as far as disseminating the information that's coming from the scientists and different universities around the country and disseminate it out to the hunting public, that is what they do. They are an educational resource. They have so many educational materials. I've got 3 books that they sell. The original book, Quality Whitetails, it kind of was part of the start of the quality deer management move. After Al Brothers' book, obviously. I think there's a book, Quality Food Plots. There's all kinds of resources there that, if you want information on deer, and then they've got the deer steward classes as well, where you can get really in-depth information in a classroom setting. You can actually take them online as well. Just fabulous information that's being taught by the best biologists in the country.
That's great. I'm definitely going to include some of those links into the show notes of this episode here. That way people can access them from this show. So thank you for sharing that with me. And I'm definitely going to go through and check some of those out as well.
Yeah, it's very simple. QDMA.com is the organization. And another one that you might want to look into is there's the National Deer Alliance that's actually putting a little bit of an advocacy part to this. The QDMA, there's several nonprofit deer type organizations that are part of this National Deer Alliance, and you can join the National Deer Alliance for free and just sign up online. Just go to their webpage, and you get weekly digests of things that are coming out about deer. They just put together a weekly digest and send it to you. Choose what you want to read and what you don't want to read, and it's free.
That's great. You can't beat free. I mean, free resources are hard to come by nowadays.
Certainly, and it's a great organization because they are very politically connected. They're working with all different state agencies to do things to help support the cause of the deer hunter.
Of course, yeah. And of course, you guys have also your website, the UGA Deer Lab. I've gone on there, especially a lot more over the past couple of weeks, but I've gone on there even in the past and looking at some of the research you guys have done and some of the information you guys share on there. And you guys provided some really, really good, you really dumb it down to where just about anybody is able to go on there and absorb the information and be able to use it and be able to put it into a useful way.
I appreciate that.
But yeah, thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm definitely going to take you up on those future episodes because, like I said, I've got so much more I want to talk with you about. But as we're kind of coming up on time here, I guess I'll have to let you go for now.
All right. Sounds great. I enjoyed it, Tyler.
All right. Thank you very much. You have a good rest of your night, and I'll be in contact with you over the coming months. So, again, thank you so much for being on today.